Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 59, The Kabalah and Alchemy, Book 8, The Kabalah and Other Channels of Esoteric Tradition by Arthur Edward Waite. 2. The Kabalah and Alchemy. Some reference has been made to the subject of Hermetic tradition when considering the Kabbalistic treatise entitled Purifying Fire. We have there seen that the Hermetic and Kabalistic philosophies are generally ascribed to a common source, and this is the case with sympathetic as well as hostile critics. The question, however, is exceedingly complicated, and though I should have much hesitation in differing from such a consensus of authorities, I'm not less sure that as regards the branch of Hermetic philosophy which is known under the name of alchemy, we should be exceedingly careful about making and accepting statements. We must begin, first of all, by distinguishing the earlier books ascribed to Hermes Trismegistus, and not concerned with the transmutation of metals, from such late compositions to make use of no stronger term, as the Emerald Table and the Golden Treatise. When Isaac Meyer affirms that many of the doctrines of the Kabbalah, more or less veiled, may be found in the books attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, the reference obtains only and can be intended only to the divine Poimander, the Asclepios and other tracts, the existence of which can be traced about or prior to the 4th century AD. We may search the Greek alchemists in vain for any definite doctrinal connection with these works, though Hermes is naturally included among the great names of antiquity who are associated with the making of gold. And there are also other references to this mystical personage. While we must discount altogether such extreme opinions as that of Isaac Casaubon, who represents the earlier Hermetic treatises as the work of a Kabbalistic adept who was probably a Jew of Alexandria, we have numerous general reasons for admitting that there were points of contact between Neoplatonism and the Kabbalah, as seen in an earlier section. The connection of alchemy with Hermes is not through the Hermetic books of the Neoplatonic period, and its Kabbalistic correspondences must also be sought elsewhere. Among the writings of Zosimus the Panopolite, which belong to the 3rd century, there is a quotation from the true book of Soph the Egyptian concerning the divine Lord of the Hebrews and the powers of Sabaoth, which affirms that there are 2 sciences and 2 wisdoms, that of the Egyptians and that of the Hebrews, the second being rendered more solid by divine justice. Both come from remote ages. They do not investigate material and corruptible bodies. Their generation operates independently of any foreign action, sustained by prayer and divine grace. Then comes the following significant passage, which accounts for the philosophical work of alchemy being likened to that of God in the creation. The symbol of chemistry is drawn from creation in the eyes of its adepts, who save and purify the divine soul enchained in the elements, and above all, who separate the divine spirit confounded with the flesh. As there is a sun, the flower of the fire, a celestial sun, the right eye of the world, so copper, if it become flour, that is, if it assume the color of gold by purification, becomes then a terrestrial sun, which is king on earth as the sun is king in the sky. There is no doubt that this is a very important citation. It shows why the early Hermetic books came to be regarded as alchemical in later times, and it institutes a striking parallel between Egyptian and Jewish science. But that the latter is the science of the Kabbalah, there is no evidence to cite. So also the reference to the Labyrinth of Solomon, which occurs among the remains of still earlier Greek alchemists, is a medieval interpolation. In short, the celebrated Byzantine collection, which is so far the source of all alchemy, shows no traces of acquaintance with the Jewish secret tradition. The same observation applies to the early Arabian and Syriac alchemists, who drew from Greek sources, though some extracts from Zosimus with analyses, in a Syriac manuscript possessed by the University of Cambridge, mention the talismans of Solomon, referred to the 7 planets and the power which they exercise over demons. When we add to this that in spite of such evidence for the connection between alchemy and the Kabbalah, as is offered by the late Aish Metzaref, there is very little, as already seen, to support it in the Zohar. It must be inferred that these 2 esoteric traditions grew up for a long period in independence of one another. Furthermore, there is no trace of any science of transmutation in ancient Egypt. And it is worth noting that the claim of alchemy rose into prominence precisely at that period when certain Chinese ports were first thrown open to Western commerce. If it be true, as it has been affirmed, that alchemy flourished in China from a remote period, that it possessed a literature, and that the terminology of this literature offers analogies with that which afterwards prevailed in the West, it may well be that we must look to the furthest east for the cradle of what is usually understood by Hermetic science, namely that of transmutation. The subject is far too large to enter on in this place, but we shall do well to remember that the doctrine of the macrocosm and the microcosm, the analogy between spiritual and material, the Zoharistic symbolism of the balance, have all been traced to the oldest sacred books of the Chinese. The analogies may not be so striking as the scholars who have discovered them have thought. As to this, we have no real means of deciding, but they indicate at least the possibility of a common source for both esoteric traditions at a center not as yet acknowledged, and at a very far epoch of the past. Of course, as time went on, and as alchemical literature developed in Europe, a connection undoubtedly arose with the Kabbalah. The Metzaref is one of its evidences. Many Kabbalists became alchemists. A few alchemists studied the Kabbalah. But it is still a slight and occasional connection which we must be careful not to exaggerate. There is also very little trace of it prior to the 17th century, when writers like Flood concerned themselves with both subjects, and Kunrath introduced Kabbalistic symbolism into the pictorial emblems of transmutation. The best proof of these statements is the literary history of the Metzaref itself. Mr. Mathers observes that it is known to few, and when known is understood by still fewer. If this were its position in the year 1887, it may be truly said that when alchemy most flourished in the West, the treatise had never been heard of, being first mentioned by Rosenroth at the end of the 17th century. Prior to that date, there is no case within my knowledge of its quotation by any alchemist. And although the Kabalah Denudata was described on its title page as scriptum omnibus philologis philosophies theologis omnium religionum atque philosophicis quam utilissim, I believe that only one alchemical writer concerned himself with it after the appearance of its fragments among the apparatus in Librum Sohar. This was the lover of Philalethes, who collected and translated the fragments in 1714, and also published in the same year a short inquiry concerning the Hermetic art, which introduces certain citations from the Metzaref and connects them with the symbolism of the doves of Diana, first introduced into alchemy by Irenaeus Philalethes. It follows, however, from what has been stated previously that the literary connection between the Kabalah and alchemy does not begin so late as the first quarter of the 18th century, and though the Metzaref seems to have been cited methodically by only one writer, the influence of the Kabalah Denudata may be traced in Germany soon after its publication by means of an anonymous tract which pretends to treat of the chemical Kabalah Chemica, and has these words on its headline. This little work is incidentally of importance in more than one respect. On page 16, there is a curious figura Kabbalae, where the light from the Ians Entium falls on a bearded figure holding the compass in the right and the square in the left hand, thus giving the characteristic symbols of emblematic masonry in connection with the secret sciences at a date when such a connection would scarcely be expected on the continent by modern scholarship. There are also some observations worth noting on the subject of regeneration which are useful for the mystical aspects of alchemy. Unfortunately, the correspondences between the Kabbalah and transmutation seem to be confined to the title which I have quoted. The most important information on the subject might be expected in Hofer's History of Chemistry, which claims to include an exposition of Kabbalistic doctrines concerning the philosophical stone. But the term proves on examination to be used in the loose sense of the period, and out of two very large volumes there are only 2 pages devoted to the subject of the Kabbalah. The authorship of the Sefer Yetzirah is attributed to R. Akiba, and that of the Zohar to R. Simeon. It is also affirmed that Jewish and Arabian alchemists possessed an old knowledge of Kabbalistic books, and that they were held by adepts in as much honor as those of Hermes Trismegistus. The evidence is unfortunately wanting, and as Monsieur Hofer also maintains that the science of transmutation was pursued in ancient Egypt, it would be unsafe to accept his opinion unsupported by other authority. Before dismissing the Kabbalistic connections of alchemy, a word must be said concerning two works which have been supposed to be examples of that connection and to which some importance has been attached. Both have the advantage, which they share in common with Kunrath and his Amphitheatrum, of precedence over the publication of Rosenroth's Kabalah Denudata, and one is prior to any printed edition of the Zohar. It will be needless to say that neither shows an acquaintance with the Eish Metzaref, nor do I observe in their contents anything to connect them with the sephirotic attribution of the metals, which is characteristic of that work. One is a treatise by Johannes Augustinus Pantheus, a Venetian priest, entitled Ars et Theoria Transmutationis Metallicae, cum vorca dumia proportionibus muneris et iconibus re accommodis illustrata. It was published at Venice in April 1530. Following the author himself, the Hermetic lexicons interpret vorca dumia, A, as a liberal art gifted with the virtues of occult science, a definition which leaves something to be desired, B, as the Kabbalistic science of metals. It is further a species of alchemical metallurgy concerning auriferous metallic veins. It explains the intrinsic fixed form and the natural yellow color of gold. It distinguishes the heterogeneous combustible volatile parts and exhibits how the same may be conducted to the grade of perfection. It defines, lastly, the matter of the work, a heavy corporeal, fixed, fusible, ductile, tinged, rarefied, and arcane substance of quicksilver or mercury and of an incombustible metallic sulfur, educed and transmuted into true gold by means of cementation. It will be seen from this specimen of style that the work is very nearly unreadable, even for an alchemical treatise, and it will be enough for the present purpose to note the fact of its existence and to observe that it seeks to throw light on the mysteries of transmutation by calculations of gematria. It exercised no influence, and no importance can be reasonably ascribed to it. The other work is much better known to fame, and it offers several interesting and so far unsolved problems to the student. This is the Monas Hieroglyphica of Dr. John Dee, first published in 1564, and containing an analysis of the planetary symbols attributed to the metals. Thus, the symbol of Mercury is composed of the crescent, which is the sign of silver, the circle, which is that of gold, and the cross representing the four elements. Special alchemical importance is attributed to their union in their sign, which represents the fundamental matter of the philosophers as well as metallic quicksilver. It will be seen that this is not in any sense information which helps to connect alchemy with Kabbalism, though it is highly important for the obscure question of the origin and history of the astronomical signs. I may observe in conclusion that there is one possible connection between alchemy and Kabbalism which would appear to be overlooked by all those who have instituted a comparison between them. It is supplied by the obscure but subsisting analogies between the ancient document of Latin alchemy known as the Turba Philosophorum and the two synods of the Zohar. I am not, of course, referring to the accidental similarity of form, though having regard to the history of the Turba, this accident is certainly a feature of interest. There are statements and allusions in this obscure colloquy, more especially regarding the four elements of ancient chemistry, which offer curious points of contact with Kabbalism. When we add to this that some scholars have referred the Turba, in the guise that we at present possess it, to a Hebrew original now lost, and that its date, so far as it can be assigned, is somewhere between the promulgation of the Book of Formation and the Zohar, enough has been said in indication of a possibility upon which there is no need, as indeed there are few materials, to insist further. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.